you're building your own mud, right? What inspired that?
Well, for quite a long time, I've played MUDs. It was sort of the first sort of online game that I had available to me. It's the first thing I ever worked on. I learned how to program on a MUD, an old LPC MUD that was I guess it was run by Stanford at the time. I had kind of tricked them into believing that I was older than I was and got them to let me do it. I printed out all the LPC stuff on my mom's work computer and went to town. It's basically been one of my favorite types of games for a long time. I like role-playing games, but MUDs always had so much more interesting depth to them than many games.
So what can a text-based MUD offer that, we've got these high-res gaming platforms now, and you're talking about immersive and engagement, all that type of stuff. So what more can it offer that those things can't?
I think they allow you to play with a lot of things that would be very complex to do in a high-res game. The various high-res games that exist right now, hundreds, thousands of hours go into generating them, tons and tons of man-hours. So much of that is to generate realism as far as how it looks, how it responds. They don't have the amount of time to go into the very subtle depths of how everything should react. If it's the first time you talk to somebody, they should react differently than the second time you talk to them, and possibly the third. If you look different, perhaps they should act different. Some games nowadays, some good RPGs will have small things like that. If you're wearing different kinds of costumes or something like that in the game, people will respond to you a little bit differently. But in a MUD, you can bring that really quite in depth, depending on how you, what kind of sort of quests perhaps you've accomplished, anything like that. In the MUD that I'm trying to build, I'd really like to have sort of world state affect things as well, and local state, and have politics and things like this that affect how people interact with the player.
Now, adding that type of interactivity in a MUD, though, is it easier than it would be in one of those high-res environments where the visuals dictate all of it?
I think it would be significantly easier. I think it's definitely possible in the high-res environments. I think it's mostly that the amount of time that goes into generating the living, breathing world of the high-res environment is already so large that on a MUD it's actually much easier to write small amounts of code to get a lot of the same things done. The description languages can be pretty easy to do to describe when somebody should react differently. There's a lot of good prior art as far as interactive fiction goes. People have done very, very interesting things with interactive fiction, much of it in a language called Inform 7, which I'd really love to be able to use in the MUD, but so far it's proving difficult to make it fit into a MUD type environment because there's multiple players in a MUD, whereas Inform expects a single player. But that style of interaction, there's a lot of existing artwork in there, and so you can tell a very interesting story, especially just being able to tell a story with words. If you have the commitment from the user that they're already willing to be reading all this text you're throwing at them, they're much more committed than in a high-res environment where they just want to see the next explosion, they want to see the next cool cinematic or something like this.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the MUD you're building? What's the story? Who's it aimed at?
It's a science fiction MUD. I sort of started writing it, one, because I was into the idea of writing a MUD, just because, again, it was one of the first things I ever worked on, and two, because I sort of want to write a science fiction novel, except I don't really have the patience to sit through like an entire book writing session. Mm-hmm. I've had this issue with O'Reilly before on other technical books I've considered doing with them, and this allows me to sort of build a world piecewise. I can create sort of smaller storylines that all play within a larger world. So it's science fiction based. It's not combat oriented. So technically, it's probably not considered a MUD. It's probably more of a moo or a mush. but for the sticklers out there from old MUD times. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's science fiction based. I read a lot of science fiction, so I'd like to incorporate some of the ideas in those worlds, have an interesting political system of some of the concepts I've read in various science fiction novels. And then it's targeted at developers. So another thing is, as a developer, I'd like to have it be something that being a better developer will make you somewhat better at. I like meritocracies. I like the idea that it can be a skill-based system. So there'll be a variety of things where there's yes, puzzles and having to get people's support for stuff, but at the same time, I'd like there to be puzzles perhaps that require programming skills, or just simply things that you can write, people who can write better bots for themselves to handle more of the mundane tasks will succeed faster, or people can choose to, I hope to have like a voting sort of mechanic in the game, and people can write their voting algorithms for themselves. So if this thing is true and these other things are true, then vote this way. Otherwise, vote this way, unless this one person says this, in which case vote with them, or always delegate my vote to this other person, or things of that nature.
Right.
And I think there's a long way to go with that. There's some really interesting stuff that Notch, the guy who did Minecraft, is doing in his sort of MMO that he's building, as far as having a simulated computer within the game. There's already tons of VMs existing. I'm writing this all in Python, so so there's a ton of existing work done to generate that kind of stuff. I'd love to be able to incorporate those concepts into the game as well. Say, okay, we'll use the same type of like simulated computer, and you can write program robots that go out and do stuff in the game once you have enough sort of skill points or power of some sort.
Interesting. So last question for you. What has surprised you about the development process that you've been going through?
One of the things that surprised me most is how many people still are working on MUDs. I really thought it was kind of a dead art, but it turns out there's quite a lot of people who are interested in it. Almost everybody I've talked to has at some point started on one and never finished. I hope not to be in the same boat, but it is a lot of work. I'm writing mine in a sort of very modern feeling way, as like a distributed systems sort of problem. It's something I have experience in, so it's kind of fun to come up with new ideas there. That, and then the user interface is actually, I don't have a lot of experience writing text UI user interfaces or things like this, and so some of those things have been a larger time sink than I'd hoped they would be. But yeah, I'm excited. I think there's a big MUD community out there, so I think there's people who will be interested in playing once it's out.
Excellent. Well, when do you expect that it's going to be out?
I expect to have a demo for my talk that I'm giving here. The story takes a long time to write, and so there'll be a demo of the software, and that's all open source, and everybody can play with that, and hopefully we'll submit patches because they're interested. As far as writing the story, getting enough that it's interesting for people to play for the first, 500 hours or something like that. I don't know. That'll take a little while to build out.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks.